Now let's talk about the plausibility of this experiment, if it happened. This is New Jersey or Rhode Island somewhere, and the base was right here on this edge of this. It was supposed to go 600 kilometers down to Norfolk. So I decided, well, since I don't live anywhere near there, why would they do it there? Why would they do the test in such a open place? Why wouldn't they go to Alaska or somewhere where everything isn't there? And what I found was that we have New York here, up here, not New York, but it's Rhode Island. I don't know, I've never been there. And we have Norfolk down here. Okay? So what I did, and remember, the first test of the Eldridge, which it wasn't the Eldridge. The Eldridge was made and commissioned about that time. The ship they used was not the official Eldridge. It was one of the destroyer class, Canada destroyer classes, which they made 72 of them at that time during the war. And all they did was they rebadged it with the Eldridge numbers, so that anyone looking at it would say it was the Eldridge. But nobody was allowed close to it. So it was a wartime. They had to be secret about everything, as far as I'm concerned. So they started in Montauk, New York, and they wanted to go down to Norfolk. They said, well, we wanted invisibility, we wanted anti-radar. That's a bunch of crap. What they wanted to do is they wanted to see if they could transfer large amounts of ships and troops anywhere in the world. So we have to ask why. Because in order to defeat Japan, they were going to have to invade it. And the only way to get to Japan was ships. This would have shortened the war. So this was put on fast track. Now, Tesla died 6 months before this happened, or 5 months. His notes were taken, and all of a sudden, 5 months later, this happens. So what I think is Tesla died. They took his notes, and they had the experts look him over and find out that his anti-gravity machine would work, as he stated it would work. But they'd have to try it. Now this is the end of Montauk, New York up here. This is Norfolk Base right here. The path, if you look on the seaboard maps, this is the one I wanted to look at. I was saying, well, okay, they want to take this ship and they want to put it into the ether and send it to the Norfolk base coordinates. But if I were them, and if something screwed up between here and here, I would not want that over land. Because if something screwed up in the water, it would just sink and, hey, we don't know nothing about it, it was lost at sea. So what I believe is instead of the Eldridge going all the way to the Norfolk base, it didn't say it went to the Norfolk base. It did not go over land. I don't think it went over land right here. It was somewhere, the real path was somewhere out here. They would have had to have ships at each point to see if this test worked. The first test was done in July. And what they did is they turned on the generator to go into the ether continuum. So the whole ship disappeared after the generators were on. This was a generator that Tesla developed that he said would work. He said that once you entered the ether, you could go anywhere you wanted to. The only problem is it couldn't steer in the ether because remember, it's 1912, 1880s. They didn't have all the things that he could test that out with, really. So what I think he did is the first test was done. It was dematerialized. They told him to turn the generators off. The ship came out of the ether and rematerialized. but a lot of the men were messed up. Now the men for this test were not related. They came from somewhere else. They didn't know each other. They were put on there as a test, a skeleton crew. The second test was done 6 weeks later in October, according to the legend, where a new crew was put on. The old crew was probably put in psych ward to figure out what was going on with them. The ship was, after the first test, it was gone through and figured out what was wrong with it. Now the second test was a big test. It was to put it into the aether field and send it to Norfolk down here. And it was all the way across water in case something screwed up. Because if this was going across land and it accidentally materialized in some guy's living room, well, the Navy couldn't explain that. Nobody could. They couldn't contain it. So they rebadged their test ship, the Eldridge. The Eldridge was launched in July, I believe. Okay, now the Eldridge logs state that it went all the way down to Bermuda for sea tests, which was true. Remember, at that time, you couldn't just get on your cell phone and find out where things were. They could have taken the ship in the middle of the night, sent it to Bermuda, had their test ship rebadged the Eldridge before that. And of course they said it was a brand new ship, and so they were testing anti-radar and anti-radar things on it. So they had plausible deniability for the whole thing. The only way for them to get the ship through the ether to one coordinate to another. Now we don't know if when they're in the aether, if they can see through it. It's like water, or maybe they can't see through it. Who knows? So they turned the coils on here, and there was another homing coil down at Norfolk. And that pulled the ship through the aether down to here. And then the coil was turned off and they popped up. Instantaneously. Just like Tesla said it would happen. Then what happens is, if they went back to the same place, there is another homing coil up here. This homing coil is turned off. This generator is turned back on. And this homing coil is turned on. And the ship would go back to there. But what they said in the legend was it took 4 hours. Now we don't know if that was part of the test or not. The first crew screwed up. And so they took 6 weeks to try and fix that. So what we know about it is a skeleton crew, all unrelated sailors, were put on the ship painted with the U.S. Eldridge badge. The real ship was not used in the tests. The sailors were not from Montauk or Norfolk. Cameras, generator crews, set up all destination sites, radar on tracking all test routes, sea cleared of all shipping near the direct path of the test map. That's what I would think. No intended route over any landmass, only water from point A to B in case of a royal screw-up. Anti-radar cover story used for deception. Remember, the best way to tell a lie is to stay real close to the truth. Anti-degassing story or anti-magnetic story, the same thing. The real test: transport the ship and crew through aether from point A to point B to investigate feasibility of instantaneous large naval movements anywhere in the world. Now remember, this was fast-tracked because this is during war. The government had the money to do it. They must have believed it could work, they had the crew that they could use because the crew is all government property. And this wouldn't be the first time they tested on naval or any military personnel. Montauk and Norfolk route was chosen 100% over water in case of monumental catastrophe of travel experiment. In case of experiment failing along the route, the test boat would sink and no one would be the wiser. The experiment was planned navally as one way to send men and machines quickly for Japanese invasion, ending the war. Because that's what they were trying to do. The fake USS Eldridge was dry docked for good and studied after the Rainbow test. Now remember, it was called Project Rainbow. What is a rainbow? A rainbow is an imaginary path across the sky from point A to point B. That's, how would you say that? A coincidence? Well, maybe. All surviving crew were isolated and studied for the after effects. No crew or individual sailors knew each other. Sailors reportedly froze or were stuck between our world and the aether continuum. Now this would make sense. For different durations, some survivors disappeared or walked through solid walls and disappeared back into the aether. Now, once you get into the aether, if you were outside that field, you were lost. Of course, we don't know the parameters of that field or that dimension. They must have been pulled into the aether dimension and crew never heard from again. Aether severely affects all unshielded bioelectric beings, that's us. Some sailors jumped overboard during the test travel, and this happened to including caged animal and test animals. Humans cannot stay in the aether unshielded, and you cannot smoke in the aether medium or have any kind of match flame in the ether. Tesla was dead at the time of the tests. Einstein used Tesla's work and did not contribute to this. Nikola Tesla deserves 100% credit for this leap of mankind. Test ship could not be independently driven from point A to point B by the crew for some reason. That's why they used magnetic coils to pull it from one place to the other. Independent guide system in the aether region was never developed and was too advanced for technology at the time of 1943. Now, if this did happen, which I don't know if it did, it's an interesting mystery. If it did happen, then the Navy would have used it to shorten the war. But Tesla did not want, he didn't care about that. See, if you look at the route here, where's my pen? The route from the tip of this island here all the way down to Virginia Beach, it's all over water, except for right over here. And so I believe it was not over this land at all. It was somewhere between Newport News and Virginia Beach, somewhere. That all over water. In case it screwed up, the thing could just sink and nobody knows nothing about it. That's why I checked this map, because it looked like it. Now on this UFO or whatever the hell it is, you can tell it's probably from the 50s, but everything had rivets back then. Do you see any rivets on it? And if the government made it, why the hell didn't they put some wheels on it? Just throw a tarp over it and move it. Kind of odd. Come on. And of course there's the Soviet one again. Now just suppose that ship right there, it didn't break in half and land against those trees. Suppose that ship is embedded all the way in the ground. Now this could be plausible if the ship's guidance system, or whatever it is, went out of whack. Okay? So the pilot or whatever puts in his coordinates for this area right here, not knowing that there is a space mass in there. Let's just say it was. Anyway, he goes through the aether. The ship materializes back into our world. And they find they have a severe case of ground poisoning.